The debt burden facing the world's poorest countries is hitting new heights. Interest payments are eating up government revenues at an alarming rate, crippling their ability to invest for the future. The situation has led to calls for debt relief. Here's Joyce Banda, the former president of Malawi.
We're not looking for charity. We understand and we are ready to fight, to build our capacities in our countries, to move our economies. But for that to happen, we need a debt relief first.
Spain is pushing rich creditor nations to get on board. The country is hosting the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development later this month. The meeting happens once a decade and aims to set the priorities for financing development goals at institutions like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. So what exactly is Madrid proposing? And what's feasible in a world redefined by US President Donald Trump's America First agenda? Let's try and find out. It's what we do here on Reuters Econ World. Every week we pick a phrase or buzzword and go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. So this week, debt relief. I'm your host, Carmel Crimmins in Dublin. Debt relief means reorganizing a borrower's debt so that it's easier to repay. It's something that happens when a borrower is in danger of defaulting on their debts and can mean reducing the amount owed, extending the repayment period, or lowering the interest rate. When the borrower is a country, the money saved swapping expensive debt for cheaper borrowings is sometimes used for development projects. That's the idea behind a debt for development swap. It's one of the measures promoted by Spain as it prepares to host the development conference next week. The international backdrop for this isn't exactly welcoming. Rich Western nations, led by the United States, are slashing foreign aid budgets. US President Donald Trump's trade war poses major risks for poorer countries. And China, who's emerged as a major lender to developing countries in recent years, is facing its own economic difficulties. Debtor countries, meanwhile, want to see creditor nations do more. Here's Aminata Touré, the former Prime Minister of Senegal.
I do think that the new way of swapping sort of debt against developing program is a good way of doing it, but I do think we have to go further.
So I spoke to Spain's Trade and Economy Minister, Carlos Cuerpo, to find out what he hopes to achieve. So welcome to Reuters Econ World, Minister.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Actually, I forgot to how do you like to be addressed? Is it Minister? Is it Mr. Cuerpo? Is it Carlos? Is it the man with the money?
Carlos is just fine. Thank you.
You've got a tough gig at the moment, don't you, being the Economy and Trade Minister when we've got President Trump's trade war being waged?
Well, it's true that EU countries, as you know, trade competences when it comes to multilateral trade agreements are actually now at the EU level. So it's the European Commission that deals with it. So usually it's a portfolio with not that much of a problem, but now it's, as you said, it's becoming one of the key issues to bring forward to the table. And of course, it requires a lot of our time and attention. And hopefully it will be something that can have a happy end, and we will be able to protect the transatlantic relationship, which, as you know, is the most important one in the world. 4.6 billion euros cross the Atlantic every day in terms of trade in goods and services. So that's a treasure we need to protect.
Yeah. I mean, President Trump has clearly upended a lot of things, including the supply of aid to lower and middle income countries. And that, plus the trade war, puts some of them under a lot of pressure, many of them still dealing with debt crises triggered by the pandemic. How would you describe the global debt situation right now?
Well, as you said, might not be considered as a short-term issue, because in the end, what we're looking at here is a slow buildup of very high debt in many vulnerable countries that now, when we are experiencing a hike in interest rates, particularly in many advanced countries as a response to inflation, then that makes the cost of interest rates, the cost of servicing debt for these vulnerable countries makes it almost unbearable. I mean, you have to look at the numbers because then it really hits you. When you look at how many countries are actually spending more in terms of debt interests than in health and education, it's countries that represent 3.3 billion people in terms of population.
Wow.
And in the end, it's not only about the cost, but also the opportunity cost of other places where this money could be better used, if you allow me the expression. And there is this quote from Professor Stiglitz, which is, I think, a very correct one. He says that we cannot allow these vulnerable countries to default on development. And this should be the key area where we should be focusing now to be able to unlock those investments that are much needed for long-term growth and also for climate action in vulnerable countries.
Right, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics. So to your mind, what's the solution then? What can be done?
Well, we have this fantastic conference in Seville in just a few days from now, end of June, beginning of July. It's the fourth conference for financing for development. And we're trying to have a call for multilateral action, for cooperation when it comes to development, with the idea to have specific action. So what we want in this conference is basically deliverables.
Okay.
It's not just political commitments, but we want to be practical. We want to get to specific solutions to these developments. And we've put together what we call the SPA. It's just an acronym to be able to remember that we need a SPA in July in Sevilla.
Sounds nice.
But it's indeed, we call it the Sevilla Platform for Action. So
Okay.
the idea is that it can serve as a pipeline, as a way to channel different initiatives. And we will be putting from the Spanish side 2 specific initiatives on the table. And the idea is that we can have coalitions of the willing. So main stakeholders that join these different initiatives, we don't need to have each and every one on board for each and every of the initiatives, because that in the end can lead to really long-term processes when adopting the initiatives. We want to push, we want to be practical. So from the Spanish side, 2 initiatives. So one is what we call a hub for debt swaps.
Okay.
And the idea is here to initially have a place to exchange best practices on these initiatives. Debt swaps, so debt for development or debt for investment, which are proven to be essential for many vulnerable countries. Actually, from the Spanish side, we've been on this for more than 30 years now. And if I remember correctly, we have almost 50 programs with almost 30 countries, which have, again, helped provide this extra development or investment push in countries in need. So there are many different experiences. Some of them have been more successful than others.
Right.
We want to put debtor countries and the different creditors, the main stakeholders, in contact and exchange these successful experiences with the technical help also from the World Bank to be able to set up in the future these debt swaps and, if possible, also try to harmonize the conditions under which they're built. It's a first step, but it's, I think, a step in the right direction. When building this hub, we will be, of course, we've been listening to the civil society and to other stakeholders, and what they want is something a bit bigger. So they want, of course, they consider that this is a great first step, but they would like for us to build financial vehicle that can be used for debt buybacks.
Right.
So that in the end, we can build a trust or another sort of financial vehicle where we can land the extra SDRs that advanced countries do have, that have not been rechanneled yet.
So SDRs, special drawing rights. So these are reserves that are held at the International Monetary Fund by countries.
Yes.
And you want to use those SDRs, you want to use those reserves to help with debt relief.
Exactly.
Okay. How does that work?
So we know how well these debt swap programs do actually work. So we want to scale this up. What we would like to ideally is be able to create a sort of multilateral debt support facility that can make use of this untapped pool of special drawing rights of these assets. Many advanced countries have committed to rechannel those SDRs to mainly the IMF, the World Bank, or other institutions so that they can be used for further financing development.
Right.
But still, there is an untapped pool. As I said, if all of us reach the 50% rechanneling of our original issuance, that would untap 100 billion.
Okay.
And so that's by how much we could initially fund this multilateral debt support facility that can be used to buy debt from vulnerable countries at a discount rate, and then not only provide financing at lower interest rates, and if you add that up to the discount that you would obtain by rebuying or buying back the original debt from vulnerable countries, that opens fiscal space, that frees up new fiscal space for them to invest.
Okay.
So you can have both sides of the equation at the same time.
Senegal, in West Africa, is one of the countries which has a debt swap agreement with Spain. My colleague, Ayan Dengbior, visited a sanitation project in the capital Dakar, which was funded by the savings from that agreement.
I'm in Cité Millionnaire. It's just before sunset, and I'm surrounded by a cacophony of sound. From the kids who have turned the street into a football pitch, to cars humming along and horse carts trotting by. It's a bustling and typical neighborhood in the Dakar metropolitan area. Just a few years ago, excessive flooding paralyzed this neighborhood. There wasn't enough infrastructure drainage in place for the water to escape, and so the main road was covered in ankle-deep water. Since then, Spain's debt swap program with Senegal has worked to help close that infrastructure gap by building sanitation pipes underground to help ease the burden. And while that is a welcomed change, Idrissa Jeju, a phone repairman who has lived and worked in the area for almost 40 years, says it's not enough. ONAS is the National Sanitation Office of Senegal. They partnered with Spain to lay down sanitation pipes all over Dakar, including on Jeju Street. Part of the challenge is Senegal is growing at a rapid rate. 22%, or almost 4 million people in Senegal, live in Dakar. And you can see evidence of growth all around you. Skyscrapers are going up throughout Dakar in almost every direction you look. And landlords here in Cité Millionnaire are building additional floors to help accommodate the growing population. But residents like Jeju say the infrastructure development has not kept up with the demand, and it gets worse during the rainy season. He says that the scariest part of having an unchecked sanitation system could mean sewage ends up in the floodwater and the risk of cholera or other waterborne diseases rise.
So, Minister, you've talked about how you just need a coalition of the willing to get these initiatives off the ground. But you do need rich creditor countries on board to make this happen. Like, what sort of reception are you getting? Is the US up for this?
I would say that the reception is asymmetric. So some countries are actually willing to rechannel and have been committing for the past years. As I said, this issuance was done in 2021, have been committing to rechannel most of their SDRs. Countries such as Canada, Spain, Japan are leading the pack in terms of rechanneling. Actually, we will be announcing in Seville that Spain will reach its commitment of rechanneling 50% with an extra $1.9 billion worth in SDRs that we will be rechanneling to IMF trusts.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're doing is also making a call for others to follow suit. Then there are other initiatives on the table from different actors saying that IMF should enter into a recurrent issuance of SDRs, or even have asymmetric issuances of SDRs that will only be geared towards the less developed countries. But these are initiatives that require a majority because it needs to change the regulation of the fund. So that's a bit more of a medium or long-term work that we need to enter in. But right now, there is a lot of space there to make good on our contribution to financing for development.
But is the US going to do this? It's the biggest shareholder in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund.
Well, what we expect is that everyone would at least consider how important it is to go ahead with multilateral view on financing for development. As I said, in the end, there is more at stake here than just bilateral relationships or a specific interests.
But it's hard doing this right now. President Trump doesn't seem to like multilateral organizations. You know, he left the G7 summit early. And, you know, he's threatened to boycott the G20 summit later this year. Like, it's a tough time to be doing this, right?
Well, I would say it's the best time to be doing it, or the most important one, at least. It's key to remind ourselves that the multilateral rules-based order has actually provided for a win-win for many, and that might not have been the perfect system, or we might need to, of course, enhance, improve it, but it's the way forward. We need to keep on cooperating, and we need to keep on engaging at the multilateral level. That's how we see it, and that's how we want everyone to also see it. And that's why we want everyone to participate in Seville as well as a key lever going forward.
What sort of reception are you getting from China on these initiatives? Like, Beijing is the biggest bilateral creditor to the developing world.
I think they are willing to engage and participate. We've been seeing this. We know it's not easy, again, to have a fully fledged coordination amongst all relevant creditors. And this is the usual coordination problem that we get in economics. But this is why it is so important that everyone sits around the table. And in the end, we can understand the benefits of this common action so that we end up in the best possible outcome in this sort of game theory problem, and we do not end up having this prisoner dilemma sort of end solution, which is a worse for everyone.
So the use of reserves, the debt swaps, these all sound helpful, but are they just small change really when we look at the mountain of debt out there? What about actual write-downs of the principal, like to cut back on the debt in one fell swoop?
Well, again, as I said before, in terms of the debt swaps, I think we need practical steps in order to avoid this frustration of really knowing where we want to go, knowing what is needed, but not being able to do the big jump in one go.
Right.
So for us, this is why it's important to start building piece by piece, or paving the way piece by piece, and having everyone on board, because each and every one of these steps can provide already for some relief. There's another initiative which has to do with debt pause clauses, which is also important. They're becoming more and more common in bilateral debt contracts. Some countries have been leading also the way here. The UK, Spain, or others, we've been introducing clauses in our bilateral debt contracts with developing countries that call for a pause in the payments whenever there is a specific event related to climate disaster. From Spain, we included elements associated with famine or food crisis as well. So the idea with this hub is to rally everyone together, to put all those experiences in common, and to be able, if possible, from now onwards, to have all our bilateral debt contracts include these specific clauses. And even, if possible, again, to harmonize those contracts and have an easy way to standardize these debt pause clauses so that then it's easier for debtor countries also to engage and to make use of them. Because, again, that's another way to free space, fiscal space, whenever it's most needed. It's to avoid that some liquidity issues when you're facing a specific climate event or disaster will or might turn into solvency or sustainability issues.
Do you get pushback from creditor countries or private creditors, worried about moral hazard, the idea that if you write off debt, do debt swap, that it will kind of encourage risky behavior because there's a perception that, well, we won't have to pay in the future? Is that something that you hear from people as you're trying to do this?
Well, it is. But again, I think we need to push back against a general argument related to moral hazard. We have to take care of moral hazard when dealing with a specific drafting of those contracts. But the idea here, when you look at the economic rationale of these clauses, for example, of these debt pause clauses, is that you are making these countries sustainable in the long run. So you're avoiding a worst of scenario for creditors, which would be the default, the short-term default, because of the impossibility to serve debt in a moment of a crisis. So in a sense, it's economically much more profitable for creditor countries, and they will get more out of their creditor rights if they provide for this debt pause for vulnerable countries as well. So I think it's a matter of really explaining what's behind, when you run the numbers, then you get rid of moral hazard.
It's interesting. You're a trained economist. You've a PhD in economics. You've mentioned things like game theory and prisoner's dilemma. What's it like actually trying to push this stuff through in the real world? Like beyond, how is that? How are you finding that?
It's fascinating, I have to say.
Yeah, maybe you should have done a PhD in anthropology or psychology, right?
Indeed, that would have served me well. But it's a great question. We've been So experience actually helps a lot in these negotiations. And for example, we were running the IMFC, which is a committee that deals with IMF issues along the way, and we were negotiating the new quotas, which, as you know, is always a controversial issue within the IMF, whether or not there is a realignment is needed or not between the different countries.
Yeah.
And that served as a great experience to get to know everyone around the table, get to know also the different sensitivities, get to know how you need to engage in these negotiations, because there's also a cultural issue that you need to take into account. With some countries, you need to have more of what we say of a left hand, and
Right.
and with other countries, you need to be a bit blunt. So it's an art, I would say, and it's very difficult, but it's very rewarding once you manage to get people around the table understanding that there is a common good to be achieved there. It's a fantastic. Yeah, it's much better than what it seems in theory.
A big thank you to Minister Cuerpo for his time, to Ayan Deng Bior and Nguda Dion in Dakar, and Karen Stroecker in London for their reporting. We reached out to the US Treasury and China's Finance Ministry about what they thought of Spain's proposals, but didn't hear back. Sound design, music composition, and engineering on this episode was by Alex Summer and Josh Summer. Our podcast team includes Kim Vanell, Tara Oakes, Gail Issa, Christopher Walljasper, Jonah Green, David Spencer, and Sharon Reich-Carson. Our executive producer is Lila de Kretzer. Remember, for all your daily news, check out our weekday show, Reuters World News. You can catch it on the Reuters app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.